Dr. Chaffee, it's so good to see you.
No, good to see you. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm sorry I'm running a couple minutes late. I had a just a meeting right before this. So.
Totally fine. Totally fine. I'm just delighted to be able to be bringing this information to my audience because I've been following your work and I found you through Dr. Sean Baker.
Hmm.
And and Dr. Robert Kiltz is also, since I work with women that are struggling with fertility, it's just incredible that this information has eluded the vast majority of the population for so long. And it's
Well,
just blowing my mind. And so on the heels of having Dr. Kiltz on, who was talking about really seeing an incredible amount of inflammation in a lot of women and it interfering with their ability to conceive, I'm like, okay, I think this is a great opportunity to have Dr. Chaffee on to weigh in as, a neurosurgeon and also as a professional athlete in your past. And what's interesting is I coach a ton of female physicians. Like my coaching practice is probably 60% female physicians. So this
well,
may be like the first time that they're really hearing this, because they might be able to blow off other people as a bunch of quacks, but like hearing you and your story and I think would just be awesome. So why don't you just tell the ladies listening a little bit about you, and that's where we'll start.
sure. Yeah, well, thank you for that. And yeah, my name is Dr. Anthony Chaffee. I'm an American medical doctor, specializing in neurosurgery. I took some time off from my residency to help with a family emergency. My parents were unwell, and so I took a bit of time off. And during that time, sort of did a lot of my own research into diet, nutrition, how it affects health and disease, and also did humanitarian work in Bangladesh, working with the Rohingya refugees that were escaping genocide over from Burma. And now I'm just back in neurosurgery, completing or continuing on with that down in Australia, but continuing on with my whole passion project, I guess, which is diet and nutrition and how that affects health and chronic disease. Um, I first came across sort of a meat-based carnivore sort of diet 22 years ago. I played professional sports really since I was 18. I was an All-American rugby player and then played professional rugby for 10 years before medical school and did MMA before that. And so sports were always, very big in my life and something I was very passionate about. And so I always, nutrition was very important to me too, because I wanted to be able to fuel my body and give myself, the best energy and best nutrients to go and perform. 22 years ago, I took cancer biology at the University of Washington in Seattle, and we learned day one that plants are living organisms, and they like to stay living organisms. And so if you eat them, they die. And if you and so all living organisms have a defense against being eaten and being killed, because nature is wild. It's kill or be killed for plants as well as animals, all the way down to single-celled organisms. And so while animals can run away or fight back, plants can't. They're stationary, and so they have to affect other means of defense. And one of those is by using toxins and being physically poisonous. Most animals don't need to do that. Some little frogs or insects or something like that are more defenseless against these big monsters that are out there. But larger animals generally don't have to do that. They can run away, they can scurry away and fight and hide and things like that. Plants can't. So all of them will use poison to some degree or another, or I should say they all use poison, and they're more or less poisonous to different animals based on their genetic heritage and what they've evolved to eat. Something I learned in 7th grade biology was that plants and animals are in an evolutionary arms race. Plants becoming more and more poisonous, so less and less animals can eat them. And animals becoming more and more adapted to specific poisons in specific plants, so they can eat that plant and survive and thrive. And so, this is their evolutionary niche. And this is why koalas eat eucalyptus. Nothing else eats eucalyptus. So they have that dedicated food source. but they also don't eat anything else. And they would get very, very sick or even die if they ate anything else. And the same is true of basically every other herbivore as well. They very, very specific, confined diets. We go outside of that. We're the only species that does that. And we're also the only species that has all these horrific health issues that we are facing nowadays. And so in cancer biology, we were looking at that purely from a cancer perspective. And we were looking at all the different carcinogens that were in just regular vegetables that we would eat. So 22 years ago, we already knew about how Brussels sprouts had 136 known human carcinogens in them, and that mushrooms had over 100, and spinach, kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, broccoli, you name it, had like 60, 80, or over 100 known human carcinogens in them. And they were quite abundant. We've known since the 1980s, 1989, Professor Bruce Ames from Berkeley published a paper showing that the naturally occurring poisons and carcinogens in plants outweighed the pesticides we sprayed on them by weight by a factor of 10,000, right? So 99.99% of toxic elements are existing in the plant. It's not the pesticides. And that the naturally occurring poisons were orders of magnitude times more likely to cause cancer than the pesticides. This is why we still have pesticides. They were actually trying to ban them at the time. And he came out with this research saying like, hey, I don't think this is really the problem that we're thinking it was, because first of all, we've been using these same pesticides for like 80 years at that time. And, they hadn't really been causing a problem. Now in the 80s, we're saying, hey, we're having these health issues. This is new. What's going on? He's saying, but these pesticides are old. So he looked at it and he found that no, if you're going to eat the plants, the pesticides really aren't your main concern. We were very taken aback by that. We were very blown. I remember looking around, like looking for like a TA who was like laughing in the corner, like, he just always does this, but everyone was wildly thrashing around, looking around for who was in on the joke. And no one was, because it wasn't a joke. And it finally dawned on us, like it just sank in that like, okay, he's serious. And I remember thinking in my head, but vegetables are still good for you though, right? And he just must have read our minds, because he looked at us and he just said, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. So I was like, right, screw plants. And I just stopped eating them completely after that. I went to the grocery store and I was just walking around. I was just like, okay, what can I eat that's not a plant? And it was nothing. Like everything had plants in it, at least as an ingredient, or was just predominantly made out of plants. And if you look at the standard American diet, it's like 70% calories from plants. It is already everybody in the world really at this point is eating a plant-based diet. So it's like, well, you got to go plant-based. We are plant-based. That's the problem. And so, because biologically humans are carnivores, that's the kind of animal that we are. So I didn't know that at the time. I just knew, I'm not eating plants, plants are toxic. And so I was just walking around, I come around and all of a sudden I'm like, eggs. Okay. Oh, eggs. All right. Those don't come from a plant. Like meat doesn't come from a plant. Milk doesn't come from a plant. So I ate eggs, meat, and milk for 5 years, and I was performing better than I ever had in rugby and in school. My brain worked better. My body worked better. I couldn't get tired. I couldn't run out of energy. Couldn't get sore. I don't get sore anymore. That soreness after workout, that actually is not from lactic acid. That's obvious. Everyone knows that. That's gone within seconds, really. That's just your oxygen debt. You get sore from that burn of that initial workout. And then once that goes away, that's gone. That lactic acid is gone now. It doesn't come back just for asking. That comes from the inflammation and inflammatory factors and toxins that are in plants that causes that pain, stiffness, and swelling as a way of deterring you, saying, hey, don't eat me. I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to make you sick. Back off. And it's the plant's way of telling you to go away. And now I don't even get that. I have 1 cup of black coffee. I'm sore for 2 days. The hell is that about? And everyone's like, oh, coffee's so good for you. Well, it's a plant. It's actually a seed. Beans are seeds, and seeds are plants' babies, and everything protects its babies more than anything. And so the seeds are generally where you find a higher concentration of poison, unfortunately. And this is why I say, oh, almonds are so good for you. Like, they have cyanide. And they actually have enough cyanide that like a pound or two of almonds a day, which is a lot of almonds, but I've sat there and downed half a pound of almonds just watching TV before. 1 to 2 pounds of almonds, depending on how much cyanide is in each almond, it varies, is a lethal dose of cyanide in an adult, you know? And so, and we just give this stuff to kids, which is wild to me, you know, that they're not only are we not age restricting this, but we're saying, hey, get more of it in you. So about 5 years, I sort of slipped off of eating that way when I was playing professionally in England, and there was just, it wasn't the same access to food. A lot of, a lot of the meat was like breaded, and I was like, well, this is just really convenient. I'm very busy. Like, does it make that big of a difference? Is poison is dose dependent? Like, and I was able to talk myself into doing something stupid, which we're all very capable of doing. And I ended up sort of that was, and I definitely did notice a difference. A couple months into it, I remember thinking to myself, like, why don't I feel as just unbelievably amazing as I normally do? Am I not working out as hard? I'm 25 now. Am I just over the hill? Is that it? I'm just dying now. And I just, just going to get worse from here, or what? I didn't figure it out, but it was because of that. And the main thing that did was it just opened up the door to eating plants again. And I just, so it's a little bit more crept in, and then, you're just back to eating. Sort of like 5 years ago, I got back into, I sort of recognized this again. I said, okay, no, actually humans are carnivores. That's the kind of animal that we are. And that's why I felt so good, because I was living as a carnivore. I was only eating meat, and I was doing what we're supposed to do. Just like there's signs at the zoo that say, don't feed the animals. They get sick if you give them the wrong things. We're animals, and we get sick if we eat the wrong things. And I just said, right, I knew it. I knew plants were trying to kill me. Like, get rid of these stupid things. And I just started just eating, just meat again. And I just, I shredded down my body fat. I started stacking on muscle at 38 years old. And now I'm 42, and I'm, in great shape. I barely work out, and I look like I'm, training for a decathlon, and that's just, just like I think of it as like an animal in the zoo, right? Everyone talks about how, like, oh, animals in the wild, they're always ripped. And I always wonder, like, why are we the only squishy animal on earth? Like animals in the wild, they're just yoked, they're just big, muscular, strong creatures. And we're not. And everyone says, like, well, that's because they're out there running around, they're always being active. Like, maybe, but that doesn't explain animals in the zoo. And I've never seen a fat giraffe or a fat zebra or a fat lion. They live in a box the size of this room, for their entire lives. That's the definition of a sedentary lifestyle. And yet they're ripped. They look like they're on steroids. They're just jacked. Why is that? Well, because they're eating what they're supposed to eat, and that's what they look like. So this is what a human in captivity looks like, And if I'm working out, I get a lot bigger, a lot stronger, a lot more muscular. And when I started looking at this, at medicine through that lens, that humans are carnivores, that's the kind of animal we are, and we are not living as such. It's like any zookeeper who's worth anything can tell you, if you feed an animal something that doesn't eat in the wild, something it didn't evolve on, it gets sick. What does it get sick with? It's obesity, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, liver disease, arthritis, autoimmune diseases, all the same things that we get, slight variations, between species and things like that. But same idea, you get multi-organ dysfunction, and the biochemical processes stop working the way they should. And same thing with dogs and cats, who are known carnivores, and yet we give them plant and grain-based kibble. And in fact, this whole plant movement is like, oh, you have to feed them this, and like people are feeding their dogs like vegan food and things like that. And how do you think that that's an okay thing to do? That's biologically inappropriate. And we know that golden retrievers in America in the 1970s, when they were eating more sort of table scraps and not packaged dog food, they on average lived 17 years in America. Now it's 9 years. And so that's a big difference. People say, oh, well, this is just from breeders, just hybrid breeding. And that's certainly what people say, but just because people say it doesn't mean it's true. As far as I know, golden retriever is a pure breed. Last I heard, that's already inbred to a very high degree. And so it was a pure breed in the 1970s. It's a pure breed now. Why does it have half the lifespan and expectancy. Is that purely genetic? I don't think so. Genes take a lot longer to change. We have anyone who took population genetics will understand that like you just cannot change an entire population like that without like a mass extinction or genocide, and so that doesn't really make any sense. So I've started approaching medicine from that standpoint. I started treating my patients in a more biologically, physiologically appropriate way, even in neurosurgery. And I have a practice in functional medicine outside of neurosurgery, where we're getting people better without medication. And in fact, that's the definition of being better, is you come off medication. And so that's what we aim to do. And that's actually what we're accomplishing, which is fantastic.
That's incredible, Dr. Chaffee. I'm like picking my jaw up off the ground, because I mean, just hearing about and what is naturally occurring in plants being carcinogenic. Like, I mean, that's just extraordinary to me. And it's interesting because, I mean, I was a prosecutor for 10 years in California. I'd be like, Your Honor, the people rest, after hearing everything. And I'm like, we don't have any more evidence to show because the case is closed. But what's interesting is we have been educated for decades on this food pyramid that is encouraging us to eat a ridiculous amount of carbohydrate, most of which, I mean, it's all coming from plants. And recently there was something, I saw it on Instagram, where the US government had put out some food guidelines that placed Frosted Flakes above butter and meat.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking to myself, am I having a stroke? Like, is this real? Like, is this the meme? Like, is this the joke?
We're getting punked. Like Ashton Kutcher is going to come out of the corner like, I got you.
Yeah, I'm thinking to myself, something is really wrong here.
Yeah.
And I mean, do you find that when you're sharing this information with people initially, that they are as aghast? I mean, when we watch this video, there's probably 5 minutes straight where my mouth is open, because it's just like insane. Like, why are we not hearing this? Because the first thing you would think of is all the glyphosate, all of the pesticides. The pesticides are the enemy, but what you're sharing here is no, it starts way before then.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, all of those pesticides, I mean, they're used for a reason, right? Because they kill things, they're not good for you, right? So that's what we put them on. We put them on plants because, like I said, everything has its evolutionary niche. And so there's certain insects that can eat certain plants, but they can't eat other plants. Those plants will kill them, right? So they don't eat those. They eat these other things. And so you need to, so you can have a lot of bugs that can eat your crop because they're protected against the poisons that are in that crop. So you have to put more poisons on. You have to make them more poisonous so even less things can eat them. And that's what GMOs are as well. You're taking the gene that make some other poison out of this plant, and you put it in this plant to get that cross cover. So if like locusts or something like that can't eat this plant, but they can eat your crop, then you take out the things that kill the locust from this other crop and you put it in your crop. And now the locust can't eat your crop, and you get higher crop yields as well, because they're not getting eaten by bugs. And people say like, oh my gosh, they're becoming more poisonous or worse. Like, yeah, that's the entire point, is to make it more poisonous so that less things can eat them. Like, what did you think we were doing here? We're just asking them nicely to not eat our crops. Like they're bugs. They're going to eat something. Right. They want to eat something. Right. And so you have to make it poisonous. That's what pesticides are. That's what GMOs are. But that's what the plant is doing. We're just so this is a very well recognized fact that plants use poison to stop animals and insects from eating them, as evidenced by the fact that we're taking some of those poisons from other crops and putting them in this crop so that they're all protected, right? So what does that mean? It means that these things are using poisons. I mean, this is wow. There's a hard science called botany that It's one of the, it's one of the
Imagine
hard
that.
sciences
Yeah.
that we've had for thousands of years that we have studied this. This is a well-documented fact. There's just tens of thousands of different poisons. The WHO, as plant-based pushing agendas they have whole articles. I can send you the link talking about natural poisons in foods and how you have to be very careful and not eat certain things under certain conditions or at all ever. Cassava root, this is the third most important calorie source in the third world. And yet, if you don't treat it and process it properly, it will kill you. It has so much cyanide, it will kill you, right? And so you have to treat it and prepare it in a way that sort of dampens down the amount of available cyanide. But even sort of low grade cyanide exposure over time will lead to like organ dysfunction, such as thyroid dysfunction, and will give neurological damage. So this isn't good. This is a temporizing measure. I mean, historically, people only ate plants if they had to, because they couldn't afford to get meat. They didn't have access to meat. So they would eat plants. They would figure out ways of doing things. It was really the poor that were doing this. The rich always had access to meat. And that's what they ate. And that's why they were more healthy. Up until the last 100 years, the wealthy lived far longer in far better health than the lower classes did. Now it's about the same, actually, because everyone's eating crap. But before, it was the wealthy people that could afford meat and could afford fatty foods, because everyone knew up until about 1977, when the USDA declared that cholesterol caused heart disease, which it absolutely does not. That's absolutely false. We have hard evidence of that. We have hard evidence that report was bought and paid for by the sugar companies. That was fraud. You want to look it up. The Journal of the American Medical Association published in 2015 reports from the UCSF Medical School, published actual internal memos from the sugar companies in the 60s detailing how they paid off 3 Harvard professors to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol was causing heart disease when it was really sugar, and to exonerate sugar and say that it was safe. And then one of those professors was named head of the USDA, and it was he who authored and published that 1977 declaration. We have his contract. We know what he got paid, $6,500, which is the equivalent of 50 grand now. That's what his soul was worth. Wow. And so fat is not bad for you. And everyone knew that up until that declaration. And even for decades before that, this was a hotly debated topic. The sugar companies pushing out like, fat's really bad for you. And Ansel Keys, same guy was bought and paid for. We know that he was paid off as well. He falsified a lot of his data, and he said like, well, it may be wrong. Cholesterol may not be bad for you, but well, and what's the big deal? You get rid of it, it's not going to cause any harm. And so, and it might be averting this whole big, horrible thing. So why don't you just do that? And the sugar company said, well, most people get their calories from fat. And so you want to get rid of those calories, you have to replace them with something. So why don't we just do that with pure, sugar, just this empty calorie. It's just pure calories. It's just, and that's what they say, the empty calorie. Well, it's just an empty calorie. It's really not provide. That's pretending to be self-deprecating, but really it's saying it's a lot safer than it is, because sugar is harmful. It causes harm to your body. Fructose is processed and broken down into the same byproducts as alcohol. So it causes the same damage to your body as alcohol: fatty liver disease, cirrhosis, diabetes, heart disease, even implicating cancer and Alzheimer's. Okay. This is bad. And it's addictive in the same way as cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamines. We actually have MRI studies looking at the brains of meth addicts and sugar addicts. And sugar kills the same areas of the brain as meth, to the same extent as meth. And it damages your body like alcohol. This is a drug. This is a toxic substance that we just give to kids, which is crazy to me. People, oh, but they like it. Yeah, they'd like cocaine too. Don't give it to them. And so, yeah. And so, people knew this. This was just in the 20th century, in the latter half of the 20th century, this even became a topic for debate. Before that, everyone was eating fat if they could get it. That's what's called rich food. Oh, well, it's very rich. That used to be a positive. Now it's a pejorative. They're like, oh, that's kind of rich. Oh, I don't know. It's rich food. Before it was just like, oh my God, that's very rich food, because the rich were the ones getting it. And the rich were the ones that were living longer with better health.
Dr. Chaffee, this is incredible because I think, like, especially when you think about the past couple years, there's so much that's coming out about what we don't know. And so many of the authorities that we had looked to in the past for guidance have been giving us a shred of what consumers and people that are health advocates, or at least think they're health advocates, should know. I mean, it's crazy because, like, so the women listening to this, like, one of the first moves they make when they start struggling with their fertility, the first place they look at is diet. And I did it too when I was struggling. And, the first thing we think, okay, I got to clean up my diet. And then we start making massive kale salads. We eat, drinking green drinks and doing all this stuff. But what we're doing is, based on what you're sharing and the hard science, is creating inflammation. We're doing things that are introducing poisons into our body. This is mind-blowing.
Yeah. And I mean, think about that too. I mean, you think about those green drinks. If you just had, broccoli and spinach and kale and things like that without adding any fruit or sweetener to it, what does that taste like? Have you ever tried that?
Garbage.
It does taste like garbage. It is horrible. It's noxious, right?
Yeah. And you
And
bloat
so
like crazy. I mean, it's like, it's hard to choke that down.
it is, and there's a reason for that. Your body is telling you, do not eat this. This is poison. Spit it out. I mean, deer don't go around eating the gross tasting leaves. They don't have a health coach going around like, it's like, I know it tastes like shit, but it'll look great on your ass. Like, they eat what tastes good,
Right.
and so they're eating something that's bitter. It's like, oh, no, don't want to do that. Our taste is one of our five major senses, right? And we just say, ignore it, completely, just don't worry about it. It's bitter, it's horrible, it's awful. And you just go like, oh, that means it's good for you. Why? Why would that be good for you? Maybe you can have an outlier like sugar that tastes good, they give that sweet flavor, and that's a positive, but it's not actually a positive. It can be a positive in certain circumstances. We recognize fructose as very sweet because there aren't any plants that contain fructose that are acutely poisonous for humans, will kill you that day. And so we recognize that as a safe hit, quick hit of energy, so we can survive. And so that can give a survival advantage, but it gives short and long-term problems. It can derail your metabolism, put you into a fat storage metabolism as opposed to a fat burning metabolism. And long term, it will cause these same ramifications that we see from the processing of of alcohol. And so that will cause a problem, but it can confer a survival advantage if you're looking around going like, I can't, like a lion, right? That runs out. They can't eat any plants. Like everything will kill a feline. Like they're really sensitive to plant toxins. So they run out of meat, they die. We can get some things. We're a robust species, so we can survive on other things. And that can certainly give us a survival advantage in certain times, but we're not trying to survive right now. We have an abundance of food. And so now that's a bit of a detriment because it doesn't give such a stark reaction like it would to a cat or even a dog, that we're just like, oh, this isn't that bad. It is, and it adds up. And so that bitter taste is a very, very strong indicator that there's something wrong. That sweet sugar, that's an outlier because, that does give some sort of advantage in certain circumstances, but not for optimal health long term. So yeah, anything that you would give to, a 1-year-old and they would spit out, you should spit out, is my good rule of thumb. They get the broccoli and they go, ah, ah, ah. And you look at these videos on YouTube of these kids just like, of getting just tortured with vegetables. And they're just like, oh my God, no. And, I was that kid. I was absolutely that kid. And I remember it being physically distressing to eat this stuff. Everything in my being was telling me, do not eat this. You're eating poison.
Wow. Wow. Well, so I mean, and since you practice functional medicine, I mean, you're helping people from many different perspectives, and you're looking at the whole human being. So if a woman came to you and said, Dr. Chaffee, I'm struggling to conceive, what are some of the things, that you would have her start to educate herself about? I know this is not medical advice in this forum, but, what are some of the things that you would take into account, particularly when it comes to diet, since that typically is the first thing that, women jump to, because it's the one thing that we can control immediately.
Yeah. Well, and you do have a lot of control, and that's a thing too. In our health, people don't realize just how much control that they do have. And I hate it when other doctors say to patients, like cancer patients, for instance. I've been very upset by a few things that they've said to my patients about how they said, like, well, I've asked them, I was like, is there anything I can do? Is there anything I can eat different? It doesn't matter. Just do whatever you want. It doesn't matter anymore. It's such a defeatist idea that you have just no control over your life. Cancer is either going to kill you or it's not. It's not up to you. It's up to us. We're going to give you chemo. We're going to give you radiation, and it's either going to be a kill or cure. And you have and I'm sure they were trying to mean it in like a positive way. Like, look, don't worry about it. Don't stress. Just enjoy yourself. Have some cake. Have a drink. Have a whatever. Because you need to enjoy your life. Because you're in a pretty rough time and you may not survive. And that's what they're saying. But I think it's garbage, because you do have a say. And if you do those things, you will have a worse outcome, And so it's more important to understand that you do have a serious control over your life and your health outcomes. And that's when you really need to start taking advantage of that. As far as fertility is concerned, what I would talk to people about is really just educating them on these hormonal biochemical processes. There are a number of different reasons why people don't conceive, but a lot of them come down to our hormones and how this affects our body and our processes. Like, for men, there are a lot of things that can reduce sperm count and sperm motility and the health of our sperm. And a lot of those come from plants. And vegans have much lower sperm count, and they have much lower percentages of healthy sperm as well. So what they're eating and what they're not eating is going to affect that. Cholesterol has been vilified. Like I said, cholesterol is a very, very, very important molecule. First of all, we're made out of cholesterol. Every single cell in our body, the cell membrane, is cholesterol. Our brains are made out of cholesterol. Almost all of our hormones are made out of cholesterol. So, you have cholesterol, and the end result is testosterone and estrogen. But there's like 27 steps in between. All of those things are hormones. All of those things are bioactive. All of them are made out of cholesterol. Testosterone, estrogens, progestogens, mineralocorticoids, glucocorticoids, everything made from your adrenals above your kidneys, like cortisol, that really fundamentally regulate your body. All of these hormones are made from cholesterol. So you need to get your cholesterol right, and we've actually found that people with lower levels of cholesterol have high rates of depression, higher rates of suicide, worse testosterone and estrogen levels. So that's very important. When just putting people on a carnivore diet or just getting their fat intake up and their cholesterol intake up, I see men in their 50s and 60s increasing their testosterone by 30-40% in 3 months, just with those dietary changes. And then they're older gentlemen, and all of a sudden they're just feeling amazing. One guy like doubled his testosterone. His testosterone levels were like high for a 26-year-old, and he's just like, I feel like I'm a teenager again. And he's like, dude, you are. And he
Metabolically, right?
yeah, exactly.
Wow.
And he just felt great. The guy was 65, and he's just teeming with life. Specifically for women, and specifically for their for fertility, obviously that's going to play a major role. Just getting the substrate necessary to make the hormones, right? And then you can disrupt your hormones. You can absolutely destroy those. There are so many hormone disruptors. That's one of the classifications of plant toxin, or hormone disruptors, that will change the way your body processes hormones, or or have like, phytoestrogens and things like that that mimic estrogen or mimic testosterone and screw things up. There's like I think it's a toro root in the Pacific Islands, and this has like a phytotestosterone, right? So you're giving, and that's one of their staple meals, right? Is that, and so fine for a growing boy, going through puberty and getting, having excess sort of testosterone. Not doing so well for the women that are now having, these phytotestosterone screwing with their system. Tons of phytoestrogens. People talk about the estrogen and hormones in meat, but they don't actually tell you what you're going to replace that with. The hormone content in plants is far higher. They say that, well, hormone treated meat has double the amount of hormones as untreated meat. And it's just like, yeah, that's true. And double sounds scary. Double, twice as much. You have to put it in context, because we're talking an increase from 2 nanograms per 3 ounces of lean meat to 3.9 nanograms of estrogen, right? That's nearly double, technically correct. The context is that a fertile woman makes between 150 and 180,000 nanograms of estrogen in a day. The average birth control pill will have about 35,000 nanograms of estrogen in it. 3 ounces of soy, over 1 million, right? So this is really going to mess with your system. Yes, estrogen is good. It is important. It is important to be in balance, right? So it needs to be in balance with your other hormones like progesterone in order to be fertile and to stimulate a follicle and have that follicle be viable and implant in your womb. All of these things are very important. They're very, 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 finely controlled gradients between all these things, and that makes our body work. Our body's very, very, very complex. We've got billions and trillions of cells, and there are millions of biochemical interactions happening every second in every cell. This system is way too complex to think that we can micromanage it. Like, right. I'm sorry, you're never going to do that. Like, you screw with that system at your own peril. And this is what we're seeing. And sometimes we can fix some of the damage and fix some of the macro hormonal issues and give someone progesterone or estrogen in certain amounts to simulate normal biological functions. But that's just, window dressing.
Right.
There's so many other things going wrong that led to this dysregulation of your progesterone and estrogen in the first place. Another one is simply insulin. Everyone eats carbohydrates now. That's just a staple of our diet in every country. And we're told, like you say, from the food pyramid, carbs. Well, the problem with that is that those were lobbyist driven. You had a lot of financial interests that were influencing the guidelines, because guidelines are made by bureaucrats, are not made by scientists. The scientists can say, like, hey, this is what we think. And then bureaucrats go behind closed doors and then they make decisions, and they are wildly different from the recommendation. Maybe there's some of those recommendations in there. They're never, on that line though. And so you have different influences. And one of those is you have, the grain lobbies and, Coca-Cola and Pepsi Cola and Nestle saying, hey, you need to say this stuff is good. And so they do, because, they're shills. And everyone knows that. That's why no one respects politicians. You shouldn't,
It was big pharma. I mean, we're seeing that today. I mean, it's like, you don't have to look too far to see that.
No, exactly.
Well, and it's interesting too, because another thing that comes up a lot for women that are struggling with fertility or issues with their thyroid. And I had heard a long time ago about stay away from cruciferous vegetables, because they can interfere with thyroid function. But they don't talk about all the other things. And they also don't explain that, but we're getting quite an education here.
Yeah. And well, at least they're saying stay away from cruciferous vegetables. That's amazing. Like, I've never actually heard a doctor say that, So that's
I heard it once.
That's great.
And so but there was no explanation. I was just like, okay.
Yeah.
But it also presumes, I mean, even though, you're educated on this, like I stumbled upon this, that, some people don't even know what cruciferous is.
Yeah.
And so
Well,
it kind of,
yeah.
and so there's a lot of people bumbling around out there thinking it's green, it's good.
Right. Yeah. Well, even more so, Dr. Gundry, who wrote a book called The Plant Paradox, basically saying, hey, there are poisons in here. And he called it a paradox because, wow, these things are so healthy, they're so good for you. But at the same time, they're deadly poisonous and don't eat them. But at the same time, you should eat them. Like I don't know, he's got some conflicts, somewhere in there because he wrote it. He literally wrote the book on how toxic plants and vegetables are, but at the same time, he promotes a plant-based diet. So I don't know how you square that circle, but and I heard him say one thing. It was like a commercial or something silly like that, and it was all sort of campy. And like this person was like, Dr. Gundry, what should I have? It's like spinach. What's better, spinach or kale? And he looks at the camera and goes, the more bitter, the more better. Like it was so hackneyed, but like it was like, what in God's name would lead you to believe that the worse it tastes, the better and more biologically appropriate it is? And I have nothing against Dr. Gundry. I've never met him. I love that he wrote that book about how toxic plants were. I just wish that he would sort of make that next logical step in this line of thinking, which is don't eat plants, and dear God, more bitter equals less better, and more bitter equals more poison. And
Wow.
we have a number of patients with thyroid issues and Hashimoto's thyroiditis is when your body is sort of an autoimmune issue where your body creates antibodies, and those antibodies damage certain parts of the thyroid, and leads to dysfunction. You'd be surprised. Hashimoto's is very underreported just because no one tests for it. We test for it, and we find it a lot. So we find these antibodies quite a lot. Putting people on a carnivore diet, so eliminating out all the different sort of plant toxins and chemicals and certainly carbohydrates as well, reduces the body of antibodies, reduces the damage, and the functionality of the thyroid starts to return. It takes a long time. A lot of autoimmune issues actually respond very, very, very well to a carnivore diet, and there's a number of reasons for that. You're getting your body, the nutrients it needs, but when you're eating things that you shouldn't, you get leaky gut, you get damage to your gut lining, and things get into your body that shouldn't be there, and your body has barrier protection to keep the stuff out. And that lining is that barrier defense is damaged, and then these things can get through the walls. And then you got barbarians through the gates of Rome, and there's all hell breaks loose. And so your body mounts a defense against those things, creates antibodies to different lectins, especially. Gundry wrote a whole book about it, about how bad lectins are. So your body will start attacking these lectins, which you normally wouldn't absorb if you hadn't damaged your gut lining through eating. Things like gluten is a major culprit in damaging the gut lining and causing leaky gut. And you make these antibodies towards lectins, and there's a thing called molecular mimicry, where it's similar enough to a part of your body that those antibodies can actually work on them and bind on them and send that signal, say, hey, kill it. This is one of those stupid lectins. And so that's what autoimmunity is in a lot of these cases. And so it's not, and the thought was that you get primed, and then your body keeps, and then this molecular mimicry, you hit your own cells, but then because it starts binding on those your own cells, then your body starts becoming more sensitive to those, and it starts making antibodies specifically for them. That doesn't seem to be actually what happens, because when you remove the lectins, when you remove the plants from your diet completely, your body stops making those antibodies, and there's no spill. They're not in your system to then attack your body. So it looks like it's a spillover effect. It looks like your body's making this for something else, and they're just in the system, and your thyroid is collateral damage. But when you get rid of the lectins and whatever else, your body stops making as many antibodies, and so it just goes down. So it takes a while, but we see with Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, people going on a pure carnivore diet, eliminating out all of these different plant toxins, they get resolution in symptoms within a couple of weeks, and then in a few months they have complete resolution of any inflammation or any sign of disease on biopsy within 3 months. I've yet to see someone go carnivore for long and take longer than 3 months to resolve Crohn's or ulcerative colitis on biopsy if they go pure. And we see this for a lot of other autoimmune rheumatoid arthritis. This is not new, by the way. This is all in the literature. This is all in the scientific literature. It's also been completely overshadowed by people's thought that fat and cholesterol were bad, therefore meat's bad. And so we said, oh, well, you have to eat plants, obviously, if you can't eat meat. But people were actually curing rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, gout, all these things in the 1800s by putting people on a pure red meat and water diet. And we were doing that for 100 years. As recently as 1977, there was a book by Dr. Voegelin. I can't spell his name. It's very confusing sort of spelling, but he was a gastroenterologist, and he wrote a book called The Stone Age Diet, and which can be found on PDF for free on the internet. And he basically argued that humans are carnivores. Here's the evidence for the same. And that if these diseases that he's treating, they just go away if you just eat a biologically appropriate diet. And so, he basically argued that if, his profession as a gastroenterologist didn't need to exist if you don't eat plants, and then 2 years later, the USDA said, oh, never eat meat again. Everyone just went, forget it, and just threw out 100 years of medical literature and knowledge. Even more recently, we've had studies looking at like a ketogenic diet, which is called a fasting mimicking diet. I think to probably get it under the radar, because they say, well, fasting is really good. Well, but fasting is hard. So what about a diet that mimics the biochemistry that we would be in fasting, which I think is actually our primary metabolic state. I don't think that's a fasting state at all. It's only when you eat carbohydrates that it goes away from that. So you're not fasting. I mean, I eat 3-4 pounds of ribeye a day. I am not fasting. So I'm not. That's not a fasting metabolism. And
okay, I'm going to make mental note of that. 3 to 4 pounds of ribeye a day. Yeah, oh my gosh. Yeah. And I live in Texas, so we have amazing Wagyu. Ever since we moved here, I'm like amazing Wagyu ribeyes. So, okay. Well, so talk to us a little bit about, okay, so these women listening are going to be like, okay, carnivore. All right, I'm ready to try this. And we're so used to diets being complex, having to weigh things out, having to, do a cartwheel and spin 3 times before we can get it right. Like, can it be as simple as meat and water?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. And the more simple, the better, because you want to keep it simple. It should be simple. Nature is natural. It just happens on its own. So, that's why, a deer don't need you to tell them what to eat. They know what to eat. And, a kid putting, broccoli in his mouth hates it, and putting bacon in his mouth, eyes light up. Same with sugar. And that's why we put sugar to cover up the horrible taste of like these vegetable slurries that we give them as baby food. And
Dr. Chaffee, bacon is a very good thing.
Bacon's a great thing. I want to make a shirt or something like that. I come out with a shirt just says "Body by Bacon" and just wear that around. And it is exactly that simple. You really just eat meat, drink water, be happy. Like that's it. Salt to taste if you want. You can have some dairy sometimes, but I would avoid anything with lactose because that has enough carbohydrates in it to raise your blood sugar and raise your insulin, which is going to disrupt your metabolism. And actually, just to go back to the fertility thing for a second, that raised insulin actually is a problem for fertility because women don't make estrogen directly. Like I said, there's like 27 intermediary steps, and one of those is testosterone. So women will actually make testosterone first, and then that testosterone is converted into estrogen in the ovaries. But high insulin levels will actually block that process. So you'll block the conversion. So you'll actually have too much testosterone, not enough estrogen. Okay. And obviously that's going to be a problem when you're trying to conceive. PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. That's actually, there's different causes of it. One of the major drivers of that is simple hyperinsulinemia, high insulin levels that block that conversion into testosterone into estrogen, and you can actually develop PCOS. And that is the number one cause of infertility in women. So just a very simple change in your dietary habits of just not eating carbs, not eating sugar, limiting alcohol to, I don't know, once or twice a year, never if you can, and that will optimize things. And then obviously eating more meat, eating more, saturated fat and cholesterol, so your body has more of the substrate to make the hormones that your body wants in the first place, and everything else is going to go well as well. So it all plays into that. We're just eating the correct thing, not eating anything else. People think, oh, that's very monotonous. What animal in the wild has a an outrageously varied diet? They eat one thing. I've never seen a cow get sick of grass. I've never seen a lion gazelle again. Like, can we not have like a fresh garden salad or something? A carrot. Ever heard of carrots? Like, why gazelle every day? It's gazelle. They love gazelle, and they get that positive feedback from taste because those are the nutrients that their body requires, and so they get enjoyment out of that. They get a positive feedback from their brain. We get this too. When I start eating, 99% of what I eat is steaks, beef. That's it. Sometimes I'll dabble in something else. Mostly what I do is steak. I have never sat down and started eating steak. I'm like, ugh. If I do, I don't eat. That means I'm not hungry because I'm not getting that positive feedback. Meat has all the nutrients that you need in the proportion that you need them. So if you just eat that, you'll be fine if it's fatty enough. And so when I'm eating that, I'm getting positive. Like, this is what your body wants. And that's why kids' eyes will light up when it puts bacon into its mouth, because your brain is saying, oh my God, this is what it's about. And so you're getting positive feedback, and you're getting this positive response, so that it encourages you to keep doing it. And then you get to a point where it actually doesn't taste that good. It's okay. But then you get to a point where like, not really feeling it. You naturally want to stop. And that's because you're getting less and less of a positive feedback. And then you can actually force yourself, because I have patients that, come to this because they're trying to lose weight. And they say, I hate doing this. I have to force feed myself. It takes 2 hours to finish breakfast. And I say to them, okay, did it taste bad at first? And I say, well, no, it tasted really good at first, but I got halfway through my meal and it started tasting bad. And I had to force myself. I was like, okay, well, that's your body telling you to stop. It's natural portion control. Your body will naturally, you don't have to count calories. You don't have to count macros. You don't need to, if you need a calculator to figure out what to eat, you're eating the wrong thing. I've never seen a koala bust out like, okay, well, how many grams, like, you just don't, you just eat, you should, and nature is natural. It just happens all on its own. And so, you should, if you're eating the right thing, that will happen with you as well. So it is exactly that simple, and you should keep it that simple. I think it's as important on what not to eat as what to eat. You're eating the meat, you're getting this nutrition. That's what your body needs. That's great. But these other things will cause harm. And so the trick is not eating all that other stuff. So my hard rule is no plants, no sugar, nothing artificial. And that goes for sauces, seasonings, and drinks as well. Okay. So anytime you have something, oh, well, what about this? Just put it up against that. Okay. Well, what about pepper? It's a plant. Okay. Well, what about honey? It's sugar. Well, honey comes from bees. It's sugar. It's also bee vomit, so that's not really a bee, and, just like, we wouldn't eat, we like eating cow, but I'm not sure I'm going to like eating cud. That came from a cow. It puked up what it was eating and chewed it up more and ate it later. I mean, that's what a bee's doing, I'm not going to eat that. Thank you. And, thank you, but no, thank you. And so, and then artificial. So what about stevia or these artificial sweeteners? Those aren't carbs. You don't have carbs. Those are free, right? Absolutely not. First of all, they give a sweet response. They hit your limbic system and you go carbs, sugar, and you go down that addiction pathway again. And also it can trigger insulin as well, because you get that sweet taste and your brain goes, oh, there's sugar coming. We're going to get insulin ready, so you can still disrupt your system with these. And also they're chemicals. We think of things as calories or no calories. That's it. These are complex organic molecules that have complex chemical process, interactions in our body. So whether or not it has a calorie, that's not all it is, and we break down, that reductionism and breaking down to, protein, carbs, and fat as just calories. And that's the only thing that matters in them is a bit insane. These are very, very different molecules. Even within proteins, within fats, within carbohydrates, they are very different molecules. They do very different things in your body. So it's a lot more than just calories. So there's a lot of complexity here, and people can deep dive in and find out just as much as they want to, or as little as they want to. But it really just comes down to eating a species-specific diet. And for humans, all the best evidence shows that is a carnivore diet, just meat. So just eat fatty meat until you're full, and listen to your body and drink water to thirst, and avoid all the other stuff. And that's it.
I think that's glorious, Dr. Chaffee, because I think what it's also really about is pleasure and intuition. Because when somebody sinks their teeth into an incredible fatty ribeye, it's just pleasure. And you get to learn to trust yourself and your body, that when you're full, you're full. We don't have to look beyond our own bodies telling us when to stop. And it feels great. I mean, having been on my own carnivore journey, like, I have definitely noticed a significant difference in energy and stamina and mental acuity and all kinds of really cool things. So it's been such a pleasure having you here and giving us even more information about this. So why don't you tell the ladies listening, like, how do the women find out more about you, your work, your practice, and all that good stuff?
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure, and hopefully, and I'm excited for you and getting on Carnivore. It's great that you've been having these good results, but you'll keep getting more and more and more. So just be excited for that. The longer you go, the better you'll feel, and the better results you'll have, which is awesome, because I've been doing this for years and years and years, and I still absolutely love it. So where people can find me, my main thing is I have a YouTube channel just called Anthony Chaffee MD. That's my channel. And I have a lot of videos, and I try to publish sort of 2 to 3 a week, different interviews, so similar to this, where I bring people on that I think add to the discussion, add to the story, and add to the knowledge base. And just to show people what the information is out there. And I do a lot of videos on my own, just talking about the science and the research behind this, go through the studies. I try to put a lot of the studies that I talk about in the descriptions of the shows as well. So people can go there and check my work, see if I'm, got it right or not. And so people can find me there. And I have a podcast called The Plant Free MD. And because just going back
It's
to
great. It's great.
my original coming to this of just avoiding plants specifically, which I think is very important to think about. And so that's where all the sort of the audio versions of all that will be, and so people can listen to that on whatever podcast platform they want. And then I have Instagram, where I post reels and posts, and further down I was doing sort of like daily sort of blog posts where I would talk about different things about diet and nutrition, health and fitness. And I've sort of haven't had time to do that as much, but they're down there at the bottom if people look.
Yeah. Oh, your recipe for carnivore pizza. Amazing. My family, we're all going to try that this weekend. I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be awesome. I thought that was great watching that reel that you did about all meat pizza. I was like, how did he do the crust? And then when I saw that, I'm like, oh, I'm all over that.
It turns out well, it's not my recipe. It's Greeks Go Keto. That's their website, and so I got that from them, and I put the links for them in the description of that reel as well. But yeah, it comes out well. And so you make the crust out of like lamb mince or lamb or beef mince mix or whatever. We just use beef because we didn't have lamb mince, and you just add some egg yolks and some feta cheese. And the recipe's all there, and you sort of make that into a crust and sort of build up the sides, because you're going to make a sauce with some egg yolks and some gelatin. I don't know why, but the egg yolks and gelatin sort of whipped up and put in there, when it cooks down, it actually tastes like pizza sauce. I don't know why. It's like sort of like tangy, and it almost tastes like tomato,
Wow.
like a good, like, I don't know why, but it's like it works. And then you get just a bunch of cheese and meat on there. And
So
I don't, my mouth is actually watering right now. And like, I don't actually do much dairy. I just, because it has good things in it and doesn't really have a lot of bad things. Some of the milk proteins people have a problem with, or certainly lactose is something I avoid, but it doesn't have everything that like meat would. So it's not optimal. It's not as good as you possibly could be. And I really do like being optimal. I feel the difference. And so, but every now and then I'll have cheese with meat. And so I did it with this pizza, and it comes out, and you have a lot of cheese and a bunch of toppings, and with as minimal amount of spices and seasonings in the, if you're having salami or whatever, you put in there. I try to get things that don't really have much added to it, and try to just get the meat. And then you get these, and you actually cut it up, and like you pick it up and taste it, and eat it like pizza. Like, it tastes like pizza, but it tastes like an amazing pizza. Because at least for me, my favorite part was always the cheese and the meat.
Yeah.
And all this is cheese and meat. And so it's fantastic. And so you can, you can have it that way. Yeah. So that was great.
That's awesome. That's awesome. We'll keep up the good fight, Dr. Chaffee. This is such powerful information. You're doing amazing work, and we're really blessed to have had you on. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Love this episode of the Fearlessly Fertile podcast? Subscribe now and leave an awesome review. Remember, the desire in your heart to be a mom is there because it was meant for you. When it comes to your dreams, keep saying hell yes.